And hello everyone, welcome back to another round of API reviews. Lots of red stuff today, but today we focus on networking, specifically QUIC. So everything that's prefixed with QUIC is what we look at. I just opened them in whatever order they showed up, but I leave it to, I'll need to look up the name again so I don't butcher the name. I will probably butcher it anyways, but Marie, is that right? Yeah, whatever order you want them in, just go for it.
Yeah, if you could start with QUIC provider.
That will be this one here, right? Yeah.
Yeah, that's the highest level. I'm going to go top to bottom with this.
Mm-hmm.
And may I? Yeah, so I also remember that you mentioned something like to talk firstly about some patterns and like in general about the whole systemnet QUIC.
Mm-hmm.
So in general, like recurring things that you're gonna see in systemnet QUIC is that we do not hand out objects that are not started, and we don't let people to construct them directly. We have like static methods or like factory methods to create them, which is either like imposed by us, or it is like the way the protocol itself is designed for instance, opening streams on QUIC connection. That's one thing. The other thing is everything is async. This is mostly based on the way that we are using MSQuick as the underlying implementation for QUIC, which does everything asynchronously. And what else? I guess that we're gonna get to details once I'm talking about them. And QUIC provider class. This is basically the entrance class for the systemnet QUIC. It contains only a few members. One is supported, which basically MSQuick is not supported on all the platforms. Like for instance, you need to have Windows 11 plus because we need TLS 1.3, which is supported by S-channel in higher versions of Windows. Also on Linux, you need to have libmsquick installed. So we basically check for these things, make sure that QUIC is fully supported, and then we set these properties. So if you want to use systemnet QUIC, you should always check for is supported before you use it. And then we have two static factory methods, which is create listener async and create connection async. Both of them take options which are specific for both classes. Those are property bags that contain configuration or settings for either listener or connection. Create listener async you would use on a server side. Create connection async you would use on a client side. In both cases, if you do not check the is supported before invoking those, we will check it for you and throw not supported exception. And there's API usage, how to use it, and the details about listener and connection and their options are in the issues for QUIC connection and QUIC listener API.
So I have a
alternative.
Sorry, I have a more slightly higher level question, I guess. So how should I think of QUIC? Is QUIC like something like an HTTP protocol? Like, do we actually just send binary data across the QUIC connection, or like how? Like, what's the general exchange? Like, I guess interactivity pattern of this.
Okay. You can think of QUIC as slightly smarter sockets with SSL stream integrated into them.
Gotcha.
So it's basically transport. Like technically it resides in a user space in our case, but well, it's sockets replacement basically.
And, it allows multiplex also, which is the important difference.
So it's transport of raw bytes. So that you basically send raw bytes, you receive raw bytes, just like sockets basically.
Yeah.
So you create a connection. Yeah, so you create a connection and you can multiplex different streams, and they will be multiplexed through single connection, even though it's UDP, so there's no true connection. It's just a concept we use. So it's very similar to HTTP2, except they extract pieces and turn it into a separate transport protocol where you can stream data through, and we expose stream interface to the users, primarily HTTP3.
That makes sense.
Sam, you had your hands up.
I was going to add, like, yeah, conceptually it's similar to sockets, but like you can have multiple streams over it. It's got TLS built in. It doesn't have head of line blocking, UDP based. Really, it's good for last mile connections, which can be unreliable. There are facilities as part of it to be able to reestablish a connection over different networks. So switching from mobile to cellular while keeping the same connection alive, effectively. So it's designed for those it's really designed for mobile scenarios.
Awesome, thank you. That was very helpful.
So, any questions about the QUIC provider or the concrete methods on this, or any more generic questions?
Do you have an API listing for the options themselves?
Yeah, that's in the, if you go to listener or connection.
Okay,
like,
cool. All right,
okay.
So then we will cover that later. Okay, then.
Yeah.
That makes sense. I suppose this one here is supposed to be static, right? Because the whole type is static.
Yes.
Which namespace is this supposed to go in?
SystemNet QUIC.
So we will introduce a new namespace just for the QUIC stuff, right?
Yes, we have a new library, like it's separate DLL.
Mm-hmm. And then sorry?
I've been tossing around the idea we would just do it under SystemNet security, but nobody liked that, so we're proposing whole new namespace because it's complicated enough that it's just beast on its own.
Right. And then presumably it would ship inbox, right? It would be auto-referenced just like the rest of SystemNet.
Correct, yeah.
Do we have any plans on shipping this down level? Probably not, right?
Hopefully not. And just on a side note, on Windows, we ship the libmsQuic as part of runtime. On Linux, we don't. So on Linux, we depend on extra system package. At the moment.
And do we have any like inbox consumers of this? Like will ASP.NET use it, or will, I don't know, SQL use it or anything like that?
Yeah.
Just to add on that, basically our HTTP client is using this for HTTP 3, and obviously Kestrel is using it for the server side for HTTP 3.
We actually ship it in 6 as a preview feature, so very similar API was available in 6, and we didn't ship the ref assemblies, but Kestrel used it for HTTP 3, and we basically try to make whatever we have and whatever we learn in 6 as a public API in 7. And as we said, there'll be HTTP 3, it's the visible product for both server side as a Kestrel and client side as HTTP client.
Yeah, so regarding the QUIC provider class, on the one hand, I like that it means that there's only one place that we have to put is supported. On the other hand, it feels weird that, like, I would expect create listener to be on the listener and create connection to be on the connection. And maybe it's fine to just have two is supporteds that are the same value, just exposed in 2 different places so that it looks like it's next to the create you call, but still, like, because the provider is not really a thing. It's just this place to put these 2 factory methods and the supported flag. So I kind of think maybe we don't want to have it.
That's basically the alternative design for this. We have like downstairs mentioned. Yeah, that's one thing we played around. We don't have particularly preference. The one thing I would mention is that up until now, we were also supporting kind of mock implementation for QUICs for our own in-memory testing. And for that, we had basically the provider was abstract as well. So we could swap the implementations, and in case we would decide to I'm gonna step back slightly more. we would love to all of these APIs annotate with preview features, so it gives us leeway to change the APIs in the next release, because we basically don't have any feedback on that, and we would love to first get some feedback from users on this before we decide that this is the way and put it into stone. And which brings me to that we had multiple implementations, and we might toy with the idea to let users to provide or supplement different QUIC implementations on their own and making the classes abstract. We're not doing that at the moment, but if we were to do it, we would need some QUIC provider class and make it abstract as well. So that's only for consideration, but we don't need it at the moment.
Wait, so question, this is going to be a preview feature, this whole thing in 7 as well?
Yep. Sorry, David.
Why?
David.
Why?
Well, David, why is that a problem?
I'm just wondering why we have low confidence in the API that we ship as preview in 6 and not we just haven't done it before.
We didn't ship
normally
it. It was internal.
Sure,
no one could.
It's internal in 6. Right.
Yeah.
It's internal. I just don't really understand why we keep it preview.
This is a more official preview, right? Before we ship the ref. Yeah.
Because no one's using it.
Yeah.
I'll be thinking 7 will get enough usage that we'll know. I mean, we are using it ourselves, right?
Yes.
Yes.
I'm just trying to understand what would give us confidence when we see people use it in mass. I have this feeling these APIs QUIC is not super. It's not going to be super used in 7 when we ship it. So I'm wondering what the bar is for making it not preview in 8. Just time.
Not preview means no breaking changes. Preview means you can still have a round of breaking changes before you remove the preview flag.
And I wonder what our tripping point is to know when we're okay calling it good.
At least 2 to 3 customers.
At least 2 to 3 customers.
Yep.
Okay.
I would generally say it
That's
depends
a low
on
bar.
it depends on the feedback, right? If you receive 0 feedback, usually that means the API isn't perfect. It usually means you have 0 customers, right? Or people don't care enough to give you feedback. I think if we get some feedback and it just generally works, people just ask questions, but we have confidence that we can support the scenarios we hear about, or we don't support the ones that we just don't care about, I think then we just can make an educated decision by 8, right? But I think the problem is always when you start with something, you don't know what you don't know. So I think part of it is just knowing the landscape.
We
don't agree with what?
implemented this in Castrol and HP. So we I don't think this is not being used. We're using it in Castrol and HB client. We actually have implemented HP3 on top of this API, and we have to make a ton of changes to make it function. That's a lot of usage. So I'm not sure what one more customer with one more scenario would give us, and we can decide to keep preview. I just think the reasoning is off, because one more customer is not going to give you what I think you're looking for, which is we want to put it out and we're going to get a ton of feedback. For this API specifically, QUIC, it's so low. I just don't see that happening.
It is so low, David, but the other thing to consider is that yes, we've used it, but we've typically in our testing been interacting with ourselves, Kestrel and HP client. We've done some with browsers, Daniel can tell you about it, but due to some of the cert issues and stuff with local testing, and due to the fact that you have to, even in Kestrel and 6, do some work, right, to enable it. Not many people have actually used it.
How much?
So would this change the surface? I mean, if not, then I would say let's postpone the preview stuff for managers or directors or whatever, right? Let's focus on a surface for now. And
yeah, I mean, I think that we can decide this almost as an orthogonal thing. I think that makes sense. I would generally say, like you said earlier, something along the lines of it's for mobile scenarios. It sounds like we mostly use it on server. So then the question is, how much coverage do we actually have in the mobile space? And that
also the mobile platforms also don't have MS QUIC, so we might hook into, for example, Android implementation, because the whole QUIC is Google's toy. But we don't really know enough what surface we would get on Android, for example, that the Android team doesn't have time in 7 to even look at it. So we are certainly blind on the mobile platforms because we might have different implementation under the cover. And that's one of the risks, that a lot of stuff is based on the experience with MS QUIC and our implementation, but that might differ.
Fair enough. Yeah, I mean, in general, like, I mean, the other question for David would be like, what's wrong with making it preview, right? I mean, we think of preview features as something that anybody can depend on. It just means you have something you have to suppress in your project file, but it shouldn't really prevent anybody from using it, unlike, let's say, preview NuGet packages, right, which have more of a viral component to them. So if there are any concerns around that, I would love to hear them.
At least where it's just API surface and not also runtime features, it's important that we disambiguate a preview that's entirely library based versus something like static abstracts and interfaces, which previewed in 6, which you know, the runtime was leaving open the possibility of making breaking changes in how the IL was represented and such, and so. You know, if you preview that in 6, then you might actually have a binary break in 7.
Right. This isn't a hill I would die on to, like, we have to ship it as non-preview. I just don't like our fuzziness around when we decide it wouldn't be preview. I mean, I really don't think you're gonna get the adoption you think you're gonna get in 7 with this API that would give you the confidence to know that it would ship like and be perfect. I think it's more about what we. Yes, go ahead, Steven.
I was gonna say, I think there's a variety. We have one client, we have one server, we have like basically one consuming client, one consuming server for a brand new protocol based on a single implementation that only currently works on Windows and Linux and no other operating systems. I think we're looking for more, just in general, it's about more validation that the API works in other scenarios, that we could replat it onto a different implementation, that the existing service area meets that, and just in general bake time. I mean, if a year goes by of these APIs being out there and we don't see any reason that it's a problem, that's in and of itself something. If we see people pick it up and they have trouble, if we try and put it on some other platform, that, you know, I think it's just general bake time.
Basically, let somebody try and use it who didn't write it.
We do this every single release, but I'm not convinced that this is like. I think we're using the preview hammer. I mean, so I don't want to rat hole. Let's keep going. Let's keep going. Like, forget. What
I think it would also be different, David, if we did this, you know, in February instead of doing it 4 weeks before platform complete. We're out of chance to adjust this basically after this meeting, so that means preview.
Sure.
All right. So let's keep going then. So one other question I had is like, why are these methods async? What work are they doing when you call them?
The create connection async is basically doing the connecting itself, like doing the handshake and establishing the connection. You're gonna get fully connected connection out of that. Create listener async at the moment with the current implementation of MS QUIC does not need to be async per se, but I kept it for the consistency async, and also like in case MS QUIC changes something in the next release, they did it with stopping the listener, they might do it with starting the listener.
Yeah.
So we need it for the connection, we don't need it for listener, it's for consistency.
So going back to the notion that in a future release you might want to let somebody wire up, use the MS QUIC implementation versus, I guess, the Cloudflare implementation, etc., and that you would want to call such an abstraction something like QUIC provider, that reinforces for me that we should not use that name now, and we should move the create methods to the types that they're returning.
I mean, that goes like a little bit deeper, right? If you have a factory pattern today, especially when they're static, I don't know how you get to a world where these things become abstractions, right? Because then in order for anybody to derive from that, you need a public constructor, or at least a protected constructor that somebody can derive from. But then technically somebody would have to provide the implementation for those statics, right? So at that point it's just hard for me to see how you evolve this into something that actually is is can have multiple implementations that people can actually provide. That would be an interesting thing.
It wouldn't be static. The class wouldn't be static.
Right. So basically you're saying this would be a breaking change if we decide to make it an abstraction.
Yeah.
I think that one would work.
Yeah. Well, and even if we make them static on the types that they're on now, or left them on a type called QUIC provider and change it from static to abstract, bizarrely, if it changed from static to abstract, then the static is supported would make no sense, because you can't, like, that would have no meaning anymore. But the static methods, whether they live here or on another type, would basically be saying that they do like QUIC provider.default create listener async, because the QUIC provider versions would become instance, and then the factories elsewhere would just call on the default one.
Right.
And
yeah, you could do that.
I can see it working. It just then basically becomes are you sure you wanted to call the factory one? Because great, now we have two ways of doing everything: the static or the default factory and the specific factory. And so a little bit, if you want to do that, maybe you want to have already done that. But I would guess that we probably won't, because it's weird and complicated.
This might never happen. We never did it, for example, for SSL streams. So yes, we have different platform implementations, but we don't let people to bring their own sockets or their own SSL.
No, that's fair. I mean, I think, my question was more like how sure are you that you want to go down that path? Because if you're very sure, then I think the design you have is limiting. If you think that's a very remote case, then I think it's very fine where you're going right now. The other question I had is like, so logically, I guess listener and connection are like, client versus server kind of situation. Do you have ever like a situation where you think one side is supported, the other one isn't? Because right now your design implies that either both are supported or neither are supported.
Well, the is supported is basically checking the platform for supporting MS QUIC in this concrete particular case. So no, it would not differ for server and client. Like if you run them on the same machine.
Well, but for something like Android, would it be possible that their implementation, that they only expect the client role and they don't have whatever the server half would be?
Yeah, that's basically my question.
I think it's possible. We've seen that for sockets, for example. So I think the TV watch, you can create client sockets and you can connect, but you cannot accept inbound connections.
Right.
It's certainly possible. Not right now. We don't really deal with the mobile platforms, but I think it's possible in the future.
I think if you think there is a decent chance, I would probably go down Jeremy's proposal, remove the type entirely, and just say that you have a factory method on the listener, you have a factory method on the connection, and then you have an is supported on both. And then in V1, they are basically returning the same thing. And then, if you ever have a platform where one is supported, the other one isn't, well, that pretty much works at that point.
I think that'd be fine.
As a question, like, why are we differing from sockets, just like conceptually, in API shape? Is this just a more modern version that we're going to improve some things, or is it like different for a good reason?
It's the multiplex. That's one, right?
No, not that part of it. I'm talking about why do we have it and it's supported? The same thing could be for sockets, right? If you create one and it isn't supported, I think it throws. Like, what is different about QUIC that we want to have this bool as a first class thing?
We do have it supported on socket.
Okay.
Well, yeah, it's like whether specific address families are supported.
Is it
like
static?
Static properties.
Socket dot. I'm trying to find it.
And I think a little bit, David, would be that on Windows, if it only works on Windows 11, then like we can't. This is the letting people know it's complicated, especially on Linux, where it's do you have a dependency installed? So you can measure it from the exception, but maybe you would like a more direct answer than you got an exception.
Yeah, I mean, in general, like that's not a new pattern. That's a pattern that we have elsewhere in the BCL. We just generally haven't done the work in all cases.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's prevalent. Like I see a ton of exceptions being thrown from socket APIs for things that aren't supported.
Yeah, but on cases where the grid is more sparse, we've been adding is supported. Not that we know that people are actually calling it, but it makes us feel good that we've told people a way other than throwing an exception.
Got it.
So to me, it doesn't
we
feel
reach consensus, and we move to either connection or listener.
I guess listener, but yeah, I take it as we're moving this downstream to the specific classes.
Yeah, my suggestion is we move create listener, which we may talk about its name later, to the listener type. We move create connection to the connection type, and each of them gets an is supported. So it'll, again, for the implementations we have right now, one of them will probably just return the answer of the other. But if we find out that when we get on Android or a watch or something like that, that they just don't even have the listen API, then now those platforms will not give the same answer across both.
Awesome. Then I think, of course, I didn't take any notes, so I will write something up as we are talking about the next one. So I guess quick
super random. I guess this isn't super important. On sockets, I found the APIs. If OS supports as the prefix, and I guess that's because we bind to the OS specifically for sockets. So I guess that's why it has that prefix. OS supports IPv4, etc. As the name of the flag.
Perhaps the QUIC is not part of the OS, so it's...
Yeah, I know. I realize.
It sort of is on Windows, but it's not general pattern, so it's just complicated.
Yep.
I also think if we had it to do over, we probably wouldn't have named them that. We probably would have named them, is IPv4 supported, is IPv6 supported, is domain socket supported, or something along those lines.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it predated when we had other is supporteds.
Okay, so may I start about the QUIC listener?
Yep.
Okay, so let's imagine you have the static is supported and create a thing here on QUIC listener. And I would start with the QUIC listener options. That's the property back with the settings for a newly created listener. We have the endpoint on which you want to listen. We have the list of application protocols. This is required by MSQuick to provide ALPNs upfront before you start the listener. This is something we are not able to change. We had the discussion with the MSQuick team some time ago, and this is where we arrived. You switch the screen.
Sorry, I just copied the URL.
Yeah, okay. Then we have a property called listen backlog, which is initialized to 512. This is basically how many connections you can have in the incoming queue before you accept them. If you reach that number, we are gonna start rejecting the connections. There's specific code in QUIC specification to reject connections, which we would use. And the last one is, well, and the number is like basically randomly selected. We can change it. We don't have like any I wouldn't say idea, but there's no hard limit. What number should it be? This is what we chose, which we think is reasonable. We don't have any like specific tests or benchmarks to prove this number is the right one.
I'm curious then, given that this ends up introducing exceptions. I mean, this doesn't affect the API service area, but why?
No, it's sorry, Stephen. I will jump. It's not gonna introduce exception to you as a consumer of the listener API.
Who does it introduce? You said it has errors. Who does it introduce errors to?
we'll start rejecting incoming connections.
I see.
It'll be similar to Scenic Reset on TCP, essentially.
TCP listen backlog.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, okay. What is MS QUIC's default here?
They don't have one. This is imposed by us.
Why would we impose one then, rather than? I mean, it doesn't really affect the API surface area, and that we can expose the surface area to allow it to be configurable. But why wouldn't we just have the default be not rejecting requests unless you ask us to?
Unless we're accepting any connections, we could run out of memory, basically, via this.
I mean, that's a great reason to start rejecting connections, and gives you a great
Now,
default.
we should have a default. Like so every OS for TCP has a backlog that's like below 255. I'm surprised they don't have one in MS QUIC. Like, are we sure they don't have a default? There should be a default like somewhere.
They have different limitations. Like in case the CPU is overloaded, they're gonna start rejecting connections, and we're not going to even know about it.
What?
So they make it basically a function of load rather than number of connections.
Yeah, that's pretty insane.
Yeah,
that does sound bizarre.
I complain about it, and that's how it is with MS QUIC at this moment. So if we ever have managed to implement.
Sorry, go ahead, Tomasz.
I also want to say, if we ever have a managed implementation, we can change some of those rules, but since we depend on the underlying implementation, we have some limits we need to work with.
But does that imply that even if we set our default to 255 or 512 or whatever, that we could still start rejecting requests if we tripped over MS QUIC's heuristics prior to that bound?
Correct, and there's issue open about it, and basically it will not be fixed.
Ever? Or just no for no?
Ever until you convince them, David.
I see. So
give you all the details if you want to separately.
So there's no limit.
My concern is there are multiple levels of the stack here that could impose a limit. There's kind of the lower level OS/core implementation level. That's MS QUIC in this case, or in the case of sockets, it's the OS TCP stack. There's our library, which is effectively intending to provide a thin veneer over the underlying implementation. And then there's the application code. Exposing the option all the way up the stack enables the application to do whatever it wants. It feels weird to me that we would impose our own opinions in that intermediate layer. Like we even went the opposite direction with we went the opposite direction with socket. Like we had socket.listen where we forced you to provide an integer, and several releases ago we added an overload which is what most new code I see uses. That's just socket.listen open paren close paren, and just delegates to the OS. Whatever the OS is upper bound is, that's what it'll end up using, because we end up using int.max value. So I'm just wondering, is it really, like, I totally understand ASP.NET. If ASP.NET wants to accept arbitrary QUIC connections in some new provider, totally get ASP.NET being opinionated here. But the core library just feels that is the thin kind of wrapper to the underlying implementation, feels like a strange place to enforce that opinion.
Yeah, it looks like WCF, has a similar notion for their listeners, but their default is unbounded. Which again, the OS may disagree and start bounding it at some point, but what they've said from the application's perspective is do what you can until you can't. And
I would have probably been on your side, have not worked on servers, but like any queue that is unbounded on a server is a security issue.
Well, I think there's a difference between an unbounded.
So will enforce it.
I think there's a difference between an unbounded buffer and saying there is a buffer and it's bounded, but it's implementation specific and it's not expressed at intermediary API layers that just wrap the underlying concept, right? So, for example,
do we have a queue at all? Do we have any queue? If you don't call accept, is there a queue? That is the problem. There cannot be a queue. It either has to map one-to-one to the underlying library, or we can't have a queue that's unbounded. That's kind of like the physics.
There's no queue in system.net QUIC, is there?
I don't have answer to that. at the moment.
No,
I would have to check that.
There's a queue in MS QUIC. There must be, but there's like, do we have a system.collections.queue in systemnet.quick?
Yes.
Yes, we do.
That's a problem.
Okay.
And this
either have
basically
to
guards
bound it.
this queue.
Yeah, we either have to bound it or we have to get rid of it and just map our calls to the underlying QUIC.
Right. Well, like having a listen backlog property, and if somebody wants to set it, is fine. But I think that the default should be something like 0, which is we're going to make one up for you. Either we're going to say we don't pass a limit and we let QUIC do it, or whatever. But if we put a number here, we basically can't ever change it.
It's nuanced though, right? So like, if the number here set a setting in MS QUIC in the QUIC implementation, that's fine. If it maps to a queue at this level, I think. So from an API point of view, I agree it's irrelevant. From an implementation point of view, we can't have a queue in MS QUIC that is in our QUIC implementation that is unbounded by default. I think it's bad form.
I mean, that one we just learned the hard way with the console logger, right? An unbounded queue just
exactly
you run out of memory.
It's an right? Yeah.
I think you want a buffer. I think you want a limit. I think I would agree with Stephen that putting a number here seems odd because the number might differ based on where you run, right? On a mobile, you might say 64 is more than enough. And on a server, you might think 512 is the right number. So I think setting it to, let's say, -1 or something that says implementation specific, bounding is happening. And then, the application can decide to override it to whatever value they want, but it should not be unbounded and then grow indefinitely. That one I would agree with. But ideally, we would map it to the underlying implementation, but it seems like we can't quite do that with QUIC because they have this dynamic load-based.
Can we just change the implementation to get rid of the backlog? Like, so can we not have a backlog, and can we just map our calls to their calls instead of queuing?
Not really.
They have a callback, right?
They have a callback which they call from one of their worker threads, and which we use to
we can't throttle them?
Internal queue.
So
we can't
at that
throttle
point,
their callbacks?
Yeah, so at that point, the connection is not quite ready yet for the use. We had issues with that before, so basically.
Sorry. I think that's fine. I guess what I'm asking is, can we have a queue of 1 in our layer? And we can actually, when a connection comes in, we stash that entry and we hold it until someone calls accept, but we don't queue unboundedly, like forever, while no one's calling accept.
That would be problematic. Go ahead, Manuel.
We do not control the way MS QUIC invokes the events, which are basically giving us the incoming connections. We cannot influence that. So we have to either accept them or not.
That is fundamentally broken. If you cannot provide backpressure to MS QUIC, then you can't prevent a flood. Right?
You can do what you can do is that you're not gonna finish the handshake, which would basically idle the connection.
Actually, from the callback, you can actually reject the connection.
So we basically get the event when somebody asks for a new connection. So the connection is established yet, we cannot hand it out. And you can have multiple sort of connections pending at the same time. So we basically stash it at a point, and whenever the handshake is completed, we give it through the channel to the accept, saying, hey, you have connection which is ready to be used to the caller.
Yeah, I think this API should either not exist or not be set. And it should be a detail in the implementation where it's bounded by default. It can't be unbounded by default.
So we didn't want to have it unbounded, but we didn't know what the reasonable default is. So we wanted some option, for example, based on your machine size or whatnot, right? Whatever default you might have on small machine might be different. And if you have massive parallel system, you expect a lot of connections. So that was the motivation to make it property you can set, and you can tune it for your usage.
This is MS QUIC specific though. Feels like at least like having
the property makes sense to me. It just should default to 0 or some other number that means I haven't set this, so do what you think's the right answer. But leaving it there for an escape valve for if we decide the correct number is 4 and Kestrel decides that the right number is 402, then like sure.
Yeah.
I think it'd be fine. We can decide. We can have a semantics where 0 means we choose for you, and we can come with some algorithm based on either memory or number of cores or whatever we feel it's reasonable. And if somebody sets it, right.
Yep, I think that seems reasonable to me.
And we can bound it internally.
Should that then be like nullable?
I mean, you could do that, but arguably the number 0 makes no sense unless it means choose something else, right?
We do something similar for SSL stream, that we have SSL protocol none, which means do whatever you think is best.
Yeah. Well, and 0 is also the value in WCF for their TCP listener. Which presumably is that it does something, which may be until we run out of memory or whatever, but it's 0 as I didn't have an opinion here, don't artificially limit things.
So did I hear correctly earlier that the MS QUIC layer, it's basically just a callback that's like filling up a queue, and like we're talking about bounding that, but it's not yet.
No, so MS QUIC is like libUV. So they call a callback, and then we put it into a channel that's unbounded by default, apparently. And when you call accept, it'll pull from that channel.
Right. So like with libUV though, like if you block the thread, right? Like, yeah, you could push back the backlog. I guess the question I'm getting to is like you were talking about how you can reject connections like upon receiving them. But that's very different from not acknowledging. See, this is where I'm getting in trouble for not knowing QUIC, but in TCP, right? Like there's a difference between not acknowledging the SYN and like immediately providing an RST, right? Because one will slow down connection attempts.
I mean, what's been described in Manya or Klaus or someone or Radek can correct me if I'm wrong, but what you described is basically MS QUIC says, here you go, and you have the option of saying accept or deny, and nothing else. When in reality, it would ideally there'd be an accept, deny, and pend or something where it's like
exactly.
Let me know. I will let you know when I'm ready for the next one.
Yes. How can they not have that API like that?
Right. It sounds fundamental.
Like yeah. Right. It sounds
so
like
we actually have the pending state where the connection cannot exist, but it's not usable. So basically that's where like handshake happens and you can have more exchanges. And some packets later, you might say, hey, I have real connection which is established. Similar to SSL handshake, right? The handshake didn't finish yet when the callback is involved.
So the only mechanisms that are available to slow down MS QUIC's acceptance of incoming requests is either setting this limit ahead of time, relying on its internal heuristics, whatever those may be, or outright denying incoming requests. Is that a correct summary?
Yes, I think you can do all the above. So you have sort of layers of defense. You can accept and then basically close the connection if you don't want to. If you have additional mechanism which is more strict than whatever it's in a place.
I guess to clarify, when you hit the bounds of the channel that we use internally, what do we do for MS QUIC? Do we reject connections that come in?
I believe so.
There's no state to say like throttle and don't give me more callbacks until I call this other thing. That's not a feature. I hope it isn't the same for reads. For reads, it can't be the same, right? For reads, you can pen reads.
Yeah, you can pen reads on stream of data. Like, yeah.
I see, but you can't pen incoming connections. That is a missing API.
No, you can't.
Oh my gosh.
Well, you don't have this on SSL stream or sockets either, right? So
you do. For sockets, the OS has a default queue, and then if you use that and you call accept, like it'll queue that many and then it will drop. But it is default, it isn't unbounded.
That's exactly the
by default, it isn't
right?
unbounded. But it isn't unbounded by default. So we're arguing to have it be unbounded because the layer below us is apparently unbounded.
Well, it's not unbounded.
Do we know?
It's just bounded by a complicated algorithm.
I see.
And again, we can bound it at 12 or 1024 or even the 512 that's on the screen. My only position here is that from the API perspective, we shouldn't set the property as having a default value, because if we give it a value that is not 0 by default, we can't change it.
Got it. Yeah, fair. That's fair.
And then we can argue about the implementation later.
Yeah, I mean, it's often not a parameter anyway. Like, it's stayed on the listen socket or whatever. But like there are two issues, right? One's like the unboundedness of this currently, and it could be bounded. And then the second issue is when it does become bounded, how is that communicated back to the client? Is there connection backpressure? It doesn't sound like there is. Like, it sounds like you have to either like reject it or accept it, and there's no pending state. Right? Like, or did we get past that?
Is there as part of the connection rejection, is there a notion of that it's load and you should back off, or is it just terminated? So this is really a protocol question.
So at the QUIC layer, there is a QUIC level error code connection refused, which essentially the RFC says the server uses this when it is overloaded and users should not attempt more connections or something like that. I hope I am not mistaken.
Okay, so basically it means that there is the signal from the server that the client, if it's a nice client and not actually just trying to be mean to the server, should notice that it was active rejection and it should back off. So the backpressure is built into the protocol, just requires conformance on the client.
The only problem there is it doesn't, like with TCP backpressure, like the client knows when because it just waits for the ACK. With this, right, you're just like, oh, I refused it. That's like responding immediately with an RST. Sure, the client knows the server actively refused it. It doesn't know when to try again, unless, of course, there's some retry timeout or something in the protocol.
Okay, so small connection, the connection refused error code is only that connection refused, and there is no implied reason for that.
Fair enough.
Right, so oftentimes you're better off just like delaying responding, right? Like that's the real way to like give the client a reasonable expectation, of how much to throttle. Like it's not even like, it's the difference kind of between a 429 and just like, not responding immediately. Like you just just waiting like until you have the resources to handle it, and like it's fine. You can like keep the queue or whatever. Like you're just like not ready for it right now.
So we might be able to design something in the future or work with MS-QUIC or do different implementation, but I don't think we can really do it at this moment.
Yeah, that's fine.
So I would say, if you have concerns, we can park it and we can basically do improvements over time.
Yeah, so I guess the default is 0, and then we can infer 0 as 0 or -1. Not sure what our standard is now as default implementation.
Since 0 would itself make no sense, it seems fine to be a choose whatever you want server.
Yeah.
So we just remove the default initializer and just leave it at 0? Yeah, okay.
And we bound the queue to something we believe it's reasonable, and we don't...
Yep.
That makes sense to me.
Presumably the type has a public constructor, right? That's just an oversight, I suppose.
Yep.
And then are we sure that list is the right type here?
We're copying what we're using in SSL authentication options.
Okay. I guess if it works there, it should work here.
In TCP listener, the endpoint to listen on is called local endpoint instead of listen endpoint. Should we match that one, or is there a reason we think it should be a different name?
Yeah, we can change it. No issues with that.
So you prefer, what was it, local endpoint?
Yeah, I mean, that was just the consistency question of, do we use this name elsewhere? And TCP listener is what we're comparing this to, and there it's called local endpoint. I mean, the parameter is called local EP, but the property that exposes it back is called local endpoint.
And where was that alignment with SSL stream, or what was that?
TCP listener.
TCP listener.
Just heads up that TCP listener is not something we're super proud of. It's kind of legacy-ish APIs.
It's the same on socket.
So what
Okay,
was that,
fair.
Stephen?
It's the same on socket.
I see.
It's local endpoint on socket.
Yeah.
Okay.
And for what it's worth, connection context in ASP.NET as well. So pretty consistent.
Yeah, but we're not part of
The
ASP.NET
copy
either.
socket. The copy socket, actually.
That's some serious shade.
You're welcome.
We'll forgive you more.
Which of these are nullable?
None.
So what does listen
Ooh.
endpoint dot get return when you first use it?
Well, it's not meant to be get.
Well,
Yeah, so, I mean, the next question is, which of these are required?
All of them.
no, that can't
Except
be
the
true.
backlog.
Except the listen endpoint, we just decided to default to 0, but all of them. Like without the local
Well, no,
endpoint,
that-
how would you know where to listen to? Oh, Stephen?
When you say required, like application protocols, does that default to a collection, or is that actually null? Like this has a public parameterless constructor, right? So all of these properties have a default state.
Yeah.
Yeah, and if the listen endpoint, the application protocols, and the connection options callback are all required, then there should not be a default constructor, and the constructor should require those three things.
Are we using
And then they
required
should be not
properties
settable.
yet?
Then it's kind of like, I would say, hard to use when you want to like create the instance and then like pass it through different methods to set different things up, for instance. But yeah, we can create a constructor here.
I mean, you can create a structure, or we could use the new C# 11 required properties support. We've never done that before because it doesn't exist yet, but we could experiment with it. But I still think we need, like, you would have to mark everything other than listen backlog as required. And even then, it's not clear what we would want to do from things other than C#. Like, I think the getters have to return I think these have to be nullable.
I mean,
right?
application protocols wouldn't have a setter, right? I mean, it would be a collection you add to or clear, right? So I think the default state for this would be an empty collection, if anything.
We could return empty collection. It's just if you try to use empty collection on actual real listener, it's gonna fail.
Right.
But as far as to get a setter, that'd be fine. I think we do that for some the X59 chain or whatnot. If you ask for a property which wasn't set, it just gives you back empty collection.
Like, I guess
Doesn't answer the IP endpoint, though.
Yeah, I guess why you would have to provide an endpoint, but do we really have to provide a set of protocols? Or is there no default where we can say we accept these three or something?
No, you have to provide a protocol. You have to.
That's limitation of MSQuick, unfortunately.
Well, I mean, I understand that we need to provide one, but we can't say like most people would pass in these three. Like, there's no default, sensibly.
No.
Well, there'll be HTTP3, right? There'll be sensible default.
No, I don't think so. No.
We don't know which protocols users will want to implement in the future over QUIC, so
people passing HTTP3 will use the HTTP3 directly via HTTP client. They have no reason to use a QUIC listener. So you basically don't know what kind of thing offshoot they want to do.
So this thing is required, and you just put an arbitrary string, I guess, or byte array in there, or string, I guess, that works too. So you say my protocol, and then you pass in a thing. Is that what you do? Is there a sample usage of how you use this thing in this issue? Scroll down a little bit. Emo?
Yeah, I heard you, but there's a delay on the stream.
Yeah, so you have HTTP3 there, but that isn't what you would do. You'd probably just like do a new protocol, pass in a string. It's like my protocol, and it's required on both server and I see. Got it. Interesting.
So this is not a struct. This is not an enum. It's like a struct just wrapping a string, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah. If I remember from TLS, it's actually just wrapping a byte array.
Byte array.
ASCII or UTF-8 encoding of the string is a common byte array to send.
Yeah.
So literally any random string goes here. Like that's amazing.
Yeah. Could be email protocol.
You don't want that. It's very buggy.
It'd be buggy. I know.
And all the time it tells you that connection's lost. Plus press here to reset the page.
Ouch, somebody's using my Blazor apps. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know enough about C#, but I think require doesn't really work for collections either, right? I think that would be, you now have to literally assign the collection, right? Which is, I don't think what we would want.
Well, that's what's being done on the screen right now.
Yeah, I know, but that seems
well,
really
it isn't
problematic.
The listener example didn't say new, so they're using just the collection add pattern. So it was actually expecting that the collection had a non-null default.
Yeah, here it is, but then here it isn't, right? So it's both things are on screen right now. But I think idiomatic in C#, you generally don't set collections. Generally, collections are, you know, non-empty, non-settable, and you just are empty and non-settable, and you just add to them.
Yep.
Only if you have a mutable object, right? If it's immutable, then you'd probably want to set the object directly.
Well, if it's immutable,
what
immutable, even then we generally return you an empty collection. It's just, you know, it just happens to be a singleton at that point, right? But we generally don't have collections to be null because as soon as you for each over them, bad things will happen.
I mean, if it was a mutable state being a tuple, basically, then sure, null in could be null out. But if it's a optional properties thing, then it's the first get initializes the collection, and then and now you're adding to the thing that just got initialized.
Right.
But yeah, so I think, you know, if we want to call it list is fine, but definitely the application protocols should be get only, and I think all the things that are required means that we want no default constructors, and we want the way that we tell people is required is it's a formal constructor parameter. So you'd have to say, so it's, you know, new quick server connection options of an endpoint, an IEnumerable of SSL application protocol, and the callback, whatever that means.
I mean, what is nice is if you make it a constructor, you can overload. You could say you have one overload where you just take in a single application protocol rather than a collection, which makes it probably also nicer to use if most people just pass in one string, right?
Yep.
Which I assume is what most people would do, and then sometimes you may do two, right? And then fine, now you have to.
For the listener, it might make sense, but then basically for the client, we have static list we pass over and over and over without allocation. So so it'd be actually nice if you can give it a connection because it's done once per HTTP client and it's only HTTP3 and basically.
That's fair. Is that what we did for SSL stream?
I guess I didn't quite catch what the allocation reduction here would be if we just have a constructor that takes arguments. Why would that increase the number of allocations?
He wants the list to be assignable instead of just addable to.
Oh, because you want to share this.
Walk up to it and say, just use this exact same list on every listen.
Or a connect or whatever that is, right? We just pre-create it and we use it over and over and over again.
I mean, if you wanted to, you could do that too, right? I mean, you could just decide that the whole type is read-only effectively, and you only have a constructor, and then you take an iRead-only list of application protocol that you just assign to the property, and then you call it good, and then you can just share the array if you wanted to. I would generally avoid a design where people can pass collections around that are then assigned, because then when you add to them, now you happen to modify your singleton, then bad things will generally happen.
But performance emo.
Yeah, I mean, okay, I'm okay with that. I'm just saying that at that point you should probably have a read-only type here that only exposes it as an iRead-only list rather than as a list, which kind of like my expectations if you have listener options with a collection that I can safely add to that and not accidentally change some other unrelated thing somewhere.
Yeah, it basically mimics SSL stream. So the ship already sailed for SSL stream, but if we choose to, we can deviate here.
Legit question for David or Stefan. I assume ASP.NET creates only one of these, right? You mentioned perf, but how many of these things actually get created?
The server is nothing, but the client, but YARP. HTTP client.
So I can't tell whether you're sarcastic or serious. Like, are you saying that there is a legitimate reason why you have?
I'm saying on the server side, it's not a big deal, but for YARP, you end up having a client on the server, so you have more than you're used to if you were doing a client app. I guess is the kind of the main thing.
But for YARP, it seems like you would make.
What is the client side of this?
I think that's the top one.
I did not understand the question.
On the screen, I see a server connection options and a listener. What does the client side of these options look like?
I think this is the client, right?
They're both server here. Wait. Hold on.
These are both server.
Oh my god.
One of these is listener options and one of these is server options. I don't know what the difference is.
Actually, don't know the difference. Is it the same thing?
May I?
Yeah.
If you go to QUIC connection, because you can have inbound or outbound connection, there's a different set of options for incoming or outgoing connections. What you saw was the settings for incoming connection.
So the client is a derivative of QUIC connection options.
Those are shared options for each connections.
Gotcha,
Yeah.
no. Okay.
So the client doesn't have a list.
No, it's part of the SSL client authentication options or SSL server authentication options.
Right.
And it has the list.
That's existing.
Right, but it wouldn't be subject to any decisions we make around whether it's nullable or anything, because the existing one is already null, right? It starts life as null and you set it to whatever you want.
Yes, because on SSL stream, you do not have to have ALPN, so it's purely optional.
Right. So my meta point is the client is different from the server here, and we can choose whatever we want to do on the server side, but I don't think we should be making that decision based on perf.
I still don't understand why you allocate so many options. Like, isn't the options generally just I mean, you would have isn't the whole point of QUIC that you multiplex over one endpoint? So like, why would you have to allocate that many options to begin with? Like, isn't the whole option?
So
that's my point.
Yeah, one per server.
Yeah, so then that seems like I don't care case.
Hold on.
That's exactly what I'm saying.
I just got it. This is the accepted connections options. The first one is that the server option is the actual client connection from the server's point of view. So I do care about perf here. Okay, perfect. It's good. Okay.
Wait, which one do you care about?
So connection options, the QUIC server connection options is the thing you pass to every connection that gets accepted, right? From the,
this is used for every incoming connection. Yes, this is what you return in the connection options callback.
Right.
But whatever the behavior of the. Go ahead, Steve.
Sorry, one of these, the top thing on the screen, the new QUIC server connection options. One of those is allocated by systemnet QUIC on every connection that comes in.
No, that's up to the user, because we invoke a callback that is supposed to return the options for incoming connection.
And then what do
And
we
they-
do with the thing that's returned?
What?
What do we do with the thing that's returned? Do we copy stuff out of it? Do we hold on to it? What do we do with it?
We set the connection. We create basically the configuration, which is like the MS QUIC object for the configuration from the data returned from this, and then we throw it away.
Wait.
But you can choose to reuse the same object. That's up to
Perfect.
you. You can cache it. Yeah.
Wonderful.
That
happy.
that was my question. Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry.
And I think that's what the one on screen is showing, is they built the
Yeah.
server connection state, and then the callback just returns that one over and over and over again.
Beautiful.
And then, but the perf of the connection objects of, does it start with a pre-allocated list and you're replacing it or whatever? Like, it's deferring to SSL server authentication options here, which means we're not making decisions aside from whether or not server SSL options is null or non-null by default.
So we good?
I don't know. Like,
Yeah.
based on what you described,
I-
it sounds like the user will have to create one of these per connection, and that sounds bad to me.
You can share it. You can create one and then just use the same reference over and over.
But what I heard was that we fill in some properties on the thing that the user returned. Is that not the case? No, we just
No, it gets
It's not-
snapshotted
no,
into the native version.
So we just pass whatever the user gave us around, but we don't modify it, so the user could actually share the singleton and then everything's good.
Correct. And we don't
Exactly.
even keep it in a managed code. We
Okay.
basically, the snapshot exists in the native MS QUIC code effectively.
Okay, yeah, in that
But
case,
as with
I
anything
agree.
that's shared, the user has to be darn sure that once they hand it out, they don't change it. Right. So you can't
Or
like
Correct.
They don't expect it to change, because once it is returned, it got snapshotted. So if we made a managed one, then we would have to actually clone it so that we didn't have a distinction between the MS QUIC provided one and the managed one of whether or not it was subject to delayed
Well,
modification.
I guess my point is that you can't even snapshot it. There's no atomic snapshot here. So this is in a concurrent system, right? You've got multiple threads that are all returning these things. The moment it becomes published, that no one should be changing it, and that's up to the user to ensure they don't.
And we can document that as well, just to make sure that. But it's mostly up to Dave and the Kestrel people, so they are smart. They probably know they shouldn't do that.
Definitely not smart.
There's two
What?
patterns. There's two patterns here. One is you construct a new object each time, and the other is you have some pre-created singleton that you create, never change again, and hand out over and over. And both of those are fine.
Or create and can't change. Like maybe
Yeah.
okay. Builder, create, final object, and then that is passed to things, and that can't be changed.
But
Um,
that can't be with list.
Yes, it would be a read-only list. I do have one more piece of feedback on the API. It's a little bit hard to use. So like I'm wondering, the callback is required. Like you have to pass in the callback, or
Yep.
it won't work. Is there an easy
There's-
pattern where you can set? Oh, there used to be an option where you can just set an instance of QUIC server options on a listener, and you removed it because we had two patterns, right?
Yeah, we had alternative design which contained both like the callback or the statically set options for the incoming connections, and like one of the feedbacks I got was like, why do you have two ways to do one thing if you can just return the same instance in the callback itself?
Yeah, in
So
fairness to
I-
Manya, I think that was me, and I asked, why do we have two ways to do the same thing? Why don't we just have the settable property? And she said, David wants the callback, and I said, okay, let's get rid of the let's get rid of the fixed property.
Yeah.
David does not want
we
it.
need the
David-
callback.
Yeah.
Definitely need the callback. I'm mostly wondering for like easy mode users, is it a lot of like noise and ceremony to have to like add a callback and then return an instance from that?
This is a genuine question. Are there any easy mode users of these APIs?
Probably not.
I don't think QUIC is easy to use, so certainly not at this point.
That's fair.
Because this is only the beginning. You can't even like use the data yet, right? So you just jumped through the first hoop and more to come. So I think that's
so by
easy.
now you quit. You just like close it. You close the screen and you said it's too hard. Got it.
By now you say, man, those ASP.NET developers that figured this out are awesome. Let's go use their thing.
By the way, I see in the chat someone suggesting using record so they could use it with statement. Would it something that we would consider? I don't have much experience with records, so.
All records do. Records are basically syntactic sugar that help you as the developer to avoid a lot of boilerplate writing your pipes. There's nothing you can do with a, well, 99.999% of things you can do with a record. It's just saving you from having to write out a whole bunch of boilerplate. So if you would want on this equality operators and a toString that pretty printed the state and the ability to create new versions from the previous ones by modifying a single property at a time, like that's what records provides you. So you can write it all out yourself. Records just makes it simpler to do that.
That's also something we can add later if you choose to, right? I assume.
You can certainly add all those things. It's probably a breaking change to change a class to a record, I think. But
good thing we're preview.
Right. But yeah, I don't think I would wait for feedback before adding all those things. Like, I don't think people are going to be putting these options into dictionaries and like chaining with withers, lots of options and things like that. It doesn't feel like what records were made for.
Yeah, certainly not on a server, I would expect, right? So it'd be one server, one instance, and be used over and over.
Yeah. Yeah, so going back to the API here for the listener side, you know, having the options type be a type instead of just flat parameters means that, you know, we don't have to worry about overload complication as we start, or especially if things end up getting split and we have to have multiplicative overloads. We have a place that we can add new things in the future. Presumably anything in the future would be optional because anything that's required we would have already known. But the things that are part of the options, that if all we're going to do, if you say new options and call the thing, is throw an exception if you didn't set the callback, then that should have just been a constructor parameter so that the compiler told you, you have to have set this. And it's done, and we've moved on, and we don't worry about multiple, or we don't have a scenario of multiple assignment because you gave it to us. You don't have to worry about it's missing because it was a formal constructor parameter. And yes, it got null checked at that point and you're done.
That's what required properties are intending to solve. So I guess I'm not sure why we're poo-pooing required properties if that's the scenario we're trying to address.
Do required properties, like, do they show up for F#? Do they show up for VB? We've never had them, so we've never used them, so we've never seen them. Is this the right type to introduce them?
But even if, well, I mean, even if they don't, we just make it work. Either they, we just make it work. We just say like, oh, well, they start out life as null, and then, you know, we require you to set them in C#, and if you're using F#, you still require you to set them, and you just get a different failure mode. Like,
that's fair. I mean, just, you know, going historically, what we've had is if you have, you know, mandatory options, then those become a constructor parameter, and optional options become settable properties. That's
right, and we can keep doing what we've always done. I'm just pointing out that the language in this release is introducing new features. 100%. I mean, the entire purpose of the features is to address this situation. I'm just suggesting we consider it.
Right, but I thought you suggested that like they haven't even shipped that feature in the compiler yet.
I mean, it's being worked on right now for C#11. We're all shipping at the same time.
Right, but we're theoretically API complete in like 4 weeks. So
and
waiting on an unshipped feature is.
We have plenty of time for fixing bugs after that. We should consider C#11 features as fair game. Great.
Fair enough.
I mean, especially the features preview, like what I mean, at that point, it's like, I don't care. We should just do whatever we think is the right thing. Because the
Fair
risk
enough.
is low. So what's the conclusion then for this API shape? So it would not have a construct. It would have a constructor, but the default one, and then everything is just a regular setter, if applicable, plus required.
I mean, I think there's basically two options we've discussed. One of which is the constructor, basically the approach we would have always done, which is for things that are absolutely required, we're passed in the constructor, and everything else is settable or mutatable via properties. I guess 3 options. Second option is there's just a parameter of this constructor. We, for it to be actually usable, we require you to set all the relevant stuff. And if you don't, you get an exception when you try and use it from, create listener or whatever. That throws an exception saying you didn't give me an endpoint. And the third is we use required properties to enforce what we need to enforce. And I think probably worthwhile for someone to sync with Fred and go over what this would look like if we went with that third option, and we just pick one of the 3.
Gotcha. I think the one thing that I'm not sure of is how that works for collections. Because it does seem odd or weird.
I'm not sure either. I think
if that would have to be settable.
Yeah, I don't.
That's where syncing with Fred comes into play as well. But the collection is also weird with the constructor approach.
It's sort of, but I think then we have the option to make it an overload that just takes a single protocol.
Yeah, especially if I think that's going to be the most common case, that somebody would just want to make a list of one out of it.
If that's the most common case, I actually, we've already said that using these APIs directly with HTTP 3 is not the common case. What is the common case?
So you cut
that you're
off,
inventing HTTP 4? So my guess is there is no common case.
It's too early to know. Leave it hard to use.
I mean, what are we doing?
We're passing, H3. But I might say that, like, before H3 was standardized, we were using H27, H29, or something like that. There were multiple versions of HTTP before, like HTTP almost 3 before it got like standardized. And we were passing all of them at the same time.
Was that the official string, HTTP almost 3? It sounds like something we would do.
Yeah, I mean, we can leave it all as get set and put required on the callback and the endpoint, and then the get on the application protocols. If you call the get, I think it should hydrate instead of returning null if you've used the default constructor, but we can leave it assignable. I don't think there's really a server scenario for caring about assignment versus that when you newed it, it made a new list, but whatever.
I'm not entirely sure I understood what you said. You're saying you're okay with being a get and set if it has a default value of non-null?
Yeah. And then I don't know what we do for nullability for things like connection options callback, where it's whatever the syntax is for a required property, because if you've, like, I don't know if that's we say it's non-nullable, but if you haven't assigned it and it was required, then it's null because, well, you were supposed to assign it. I understand the syntax if we say it's a constructor. It was non-null in the constructor, and the property is obviously non-null because it was non-null in the constructor.
I think the intent, and again, it'd be good to sync with Fred, but I think the intent is you make it non-nullable. If you don't want it to be settable to null, you make it non-nullable and required.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that would be my guess. And then if you're in that brief window between you've said new and you've assigned it and you read it, either the compiler will yell at you if they made that part of the feature, or you'll get null because you peeked under the covers too soon.
Well, required properties all need to be set in an object initializer. So there's no window.
True, because you can't refer to this inside the initializer. Yes, fair enough.
So do I get it right that we're going with get set plus required and no constructor, explicit constructor?
Sounds good to me.
Sounds good to me.
And, but I would also suggest syncing with Fred to make sure that the way we've designed the feature in C# works for this, and that we're building this based on the recommended practices based on the design that C# has.
Right. Yeah, I added a list of options that we discussed, and I said like we should sync with thread in the nodes.
Yep.
In fact, let me just paste them in. So there's another question from chat. It's like, is there a reason why none of these types are sealed?
They all probably should be sealed while we're in 7.0. Yep.
I mean, this is, I think, one of those contentious points, because I think our guidelines say something like only seal if necessary, but I think for things that just fundamentally are kind of created by the system anyway, it does seem very weird if they are sealed, because there's not, and not sealed because there's really nothing you can do with them. So the listener itself, given that you only get one by calling the factory method, really should be sealed in my opinion. The options the user creates, so in theory they could add their own properties on top of that, but it seems like a fringe scenario, so I would probably prefer sealing them as well.
We should fix that guideline, considering that all the major API review members today say seal by default.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Well,
it's contentious. I mean, there's a reason why we
because
have
I say existing guideline says other things, while officially not giving an opinion.
Did my annotation make it into the book, Jeremy, saying, yes, the guideline says don't, but you should?
If you wrote it, then yes, but I think you gave it after we published.
Ah.
What I'm hearing is there's a version 4 coming now.
I don't know. I'll ask my technical editor. Hey, Steve, do you remember reading your comment?
Yes.
So here are the nodes that I have. Please tell me if I missed something.
Yeah.
Or misrepresented something.
Well, I think we were, so sealing the listener. Given that the only thing that listens to the options right now is the listener connect, I think that
we want sealing the listener
to go ahead and seal those. And if we start making a notion of a, you can do plugin providers, then it will get unsealed in case the plugin provider has custom options. But so we moved the is supported. So we should have the static is supported on QUIC listener, and then we need the method to build the listener, which on QUIC provider was called create listener async. And I wonder if instead of just calling it create listener, which sounds like it's creating a listener that's not listening, we should just call it listen. Use the active verb saying that it is now, when you get it back, it is in the listening state.
So it would be listen async or just listen, because it does not necessarily need to be async. That's the consistency with connection kind of question.
So, yeah, if it is never, if basically there's never a chance that it could ever go async, then it should just be synchronous and say it is synchronous. If we think that there's a provider that would need a concept of let me get a socket ready and then I have an async notion of I went into the listening state, then being async now means that you would be acceptable to that one. But I don't think you should be async just for symmetry. If it's never going to yield, then it should just be synchronous.
Oh no, never. We don't know that. You better make it async.
Up with David, because I just like the symmetricity.
I mean, if you don't make it async now, and we find a use case for it, we can always add an overload, right? But then we have the problem.
Well, I mean, if you have I mean, I don't know what the overhead is of returning a value task, but it seems low enough that we probably don't care.
Yeah.
And it's once per server, so.
So,
sorry,
okay,
Jeremy.
So basically what you're saying is there's a static public bool is supported now on QUIC listener. Is that fair?
Yep, and static value task of QUIC listener listen async.
Returning a value task of
QUIC listener.
Value task. The good thing is nobody can see me typing right now because it's a complete disaster. Listen async.
And basically, you can copy it off of the one from QUIC provider and then just rename it from create listener to listen.
And it takes a cancellation token and it takes the options, right?
The other order,
Yep.
but yeah.
Yeah, yeah, of course. All right, so let me copy paste this in here and then.
Okay, and then our de facto guidance for iasync disposable is that they should also be idisposable, and they should implement the dispose pattern correctly.
Well, they're sealed; they don't have to, right?
That's true. It is sealed; it can do whatever it wants.
Wait, it should be both idisposable and iasync disposable? Has to be? Should be?
Our guidance for the async dispose pattern says that it calls into disposable, which means that you are already disposable.
But if it doesn't,
But
if it's sealed, then you don't have to, correct? Is that fair?
Correct. Then? If it's sealed, you get to do whatever you want.
So then you could only implement iasync disposable?
Both.
What was that email?
So like if the type is sealed and it does asynchronous work in dispose, then why would you want to implement an idisposable at that point? Because you don't have to implement the dispose pattern, right? You just do whatever you want anyway. So doesn't that mean you don't have to implement idisposable?
It hasn't come up before.
Like it seems to me like if your type wants to do some asynchronous shutdown logic in dispose, then it seems bad to implement idisposable because you basically now force it to be synchronous.
Yeah, I mean it goes back to the sometimes you're in a state where like the best you could do in that case is fire and forget the dispose async of like, well, I called it and I'm in a synchronous context, and now I can either call getAwait or whatever you do with a void awaiter, or you call dispose async and hope that it does whatever it's going to do because you've done everything you can do now.
I would assume if we weren't implementing idisposable, our dispose would just call dispose async and block waiting for it to complete. Is there anything better we could do?
Not really.
All right, so the consumer can do the same thing, assuming that what's on the screen is a mistake and it's public value task dispose async, not public void dispose async.
Yep.
Yeah, that's a mistake.
Yeah, but I mean, if what we were doing was, that there's socket or something underneath it, and it does have the synchronous and asynchronous shutdown, then dispose non-async would presumably call the synchronous shutdown. But since it's sealed, if we're saying we don't have a synchronous version, then I guess we don't need to be synchronous disposable.
Yeah, I mean, it seems odd to me to force an implementation to do this if nothing else is synchronous on the type, right? If the type is purely asynchronous, then whatever argument we have that you might be in a synchronous context to do dispose would also apply to any of the other things, right? So it seems kind of halfway pregnant, but they're not admitting it.
I mean, we also say like if you can't implement something asynchronously, don't expose the asynchronous version. If you can't implement something synchronously, don't expose the synchronous version. And there's no reason to expose the synchronous version here.
Yeah, that's kind of what I'm trying to say. Yeah.
Right. If we still had app domains, if you're in something like app domain on exit, like you are synchronous, and so that's okay. If I want to dispose this thing, like I now have to do sync over async to do it.
Which is exactly what our implementation would have to do.
Right.
Right, unless there was, depending on things. Like if this is actually doing basically nothing under the covers, it calls a delete and it's actually a synchronous dispose that we wrapped as an async dispose, then, but if there are like wait for pending connections to close and all that stuff, then it's presumably async. So.
Vanya, what does dispose async do?
It will shut down the listener within MS-QUIC and wait for the event which confirms that the listener was shut down. I assume that we can still get events from well, we certainly can get events from MS QUIC in between, which means that we can still get a new connection event saying that client is trying to open connection. At that moment, we should basically reject it, but it can still happen.
Okay, so that dispose is inherently asynchronous.
Yeah.
I assume you defaulted the cancellation token on listen async.
I did. I can scroll to the right.
And then
Should we talk about the server option selection callback?
Yeah, I was about to ask for that.
Well, that's something David needs for his beautiful Kestrel. It's basically a callback that will, based on the SNI provided from the client, gives you option to select different connection options, including SSL settings, cert, and whatnot. We are passing QUIC connection on the input. We don't necessarily have to pass the QUIC connection here. It's to get some details, but at this time, the QUIC connection is not going to be fully connected and all the properties not going to be like fully set. And then we're passing client hello info, I think. If you scroll to the right, please, Emo, if you could.
Scroll.
With the code block.
To the right.
Oh, sorry. Did I? Here we go.
Yeah, SSL client hello info, that's taken from SSL stream or like system net security, and cancellation token, since this can be async. I don't know, David must say whether they really need the connection or not. We can forgo it potentially.
Need everything, but maybe put it on a context.
What context?
Like you group all the parameters together and just put it on a single, like, I don't know what it's called, SSL thingy context. Any feedback?
Are you anticipating growth, or just
I don't know.
wary?
I'm just guessing. Wary, because I mean, in general, we have that pattern where we just don't know. We have the same for the connect callback in HP client. There's a type there that wraps the actual content being passed in.
We could possibly stuff more stuff in the SSL client hello info if it's truly related to SSL. But this one we share with SSL stream, so it would need to be something which makes sense for both.
We could put the ALP in there. And the, what else? I don't know. Yeah. Anyway, sorry.
Go ahead, Maya. I was about to say, sorry, that I didn't want to put the LPN there because we would need to allocate, because the LPN is a list or variable structure, so I didn't want to sort of pass it in unless we have use for it.
I'm not sure if LPN is available at that moment, if it's already negotiated or not.
It is.
Okay.
Well, at least the list from client, that's the kind of pending issue on MS QUIC, which got pushed to future.
Yeah. So then, I know that SystemNet Security has a lot of custom callbacks here because it largely predates or was sim shipping with Func and Action. But do we need a custom delegate here? Do we think it provides value, or should this just be Func?
If the IDE, actually no, that the IDE can't really do a good job, can it? The only reason we do that now is because we want to get IntelliSense for parameter names, right? That's basically the reason we do type delegates.
Or the more common reason ends up being that if there's some signature that Action and Func can't currently represent, like a ref or an out or something in the signature. But I don't think this one has one of those, in which case it would just be what you said, David.
Yeah, we usually care about it, the IntelliSense reason, if it's like, Func int string, and it's like great.
Yeah, it's
which
hard
of the
to know.
which of the two ints?
Yeah.
But if it's func int string dictionary, it's like, well, there's no confusion. You know what the int was, and you know what the string was.
Right. At least what's on the screen, if it's what we're looking at, like when the parameter name is the same as the type name, it's not really helping much.
Yeah. So
that's a good. Yeah, that's good. Actually, good principle. I like it.
So then, are we okay with just making it literally a func of the stuff, or do we believe there's value in having a custom delegate? Sounds like we're saying there isn't.
Is angle bracket hell like annoying? I don't know.
I mean, it is a mouthful, but it's also a fairly advanced API, right? I mean, the only other reason why I like delegates is because you can put documentation on them, but it seems the documentation might as well live on the property if it's only used in one place, right?
yeah, and again, we don't have. Going back to Steve's point, it's every parameter is basically just called the type name. So all that the documentation would say is the callback used in, and then it would say, quick listener, and like, great. So just be func, because that's what it is. I think David was suggesting making a wrapper type instead of being 2 parameters, that we go ahead and shove those into a value. So a struct of some context, but I don't know if we need that or not.
More allocations. I guess it could be a struct.
Yeah, I mean, struct of.
If we're pretty confident that we could shove arbitrary state onto those things, then it's not a big deal. Are we pretty confident? Or do we need a struct wrapper that has like stuff?
So not necessarily arbitrary, but we have a struct for the info, so we can stuff more stuff in there if it's generic enough and common with SSL.
Okay.
So we have some leeway.
Right. So the question is, would there be any other kind of data that you might wish you provided in the future that would not itself already live on QUIC connection or make sense on client hello info? If it's always going to be one of those 2 things, then I don't think we need another type. And of course, always means as far as you can imagine.
Well, what we could do with a struct is basically now we're handing out a half-cooked connection. So we could like pull the stuff from the connection that's important for the handshake and not pass the connection itself. Like the ALPN, we would allocate it only once. We would put it to the connection itself, but we wouldn't hand out the uncooked connection.
Yeah, I mean, once you're going to put, more than 2 things on it, then I think now you want to go ahead and be a class instead of a struct. And I say 2 here because SSL client info is already a struct. But if you were going to be allocating the new QUIC connection anyway, then it's similar. I don't know. So maybe it's just to consider if a struct is, or if making a structure for the func inputs is useful or not.
So where are we then? So we leave it like this for now, but then we say if something changes, we do something differently.
Seeing the func, I really do not like it, by the way. It's too long.
Angle bracket hell, right? Yeah.
Yeah, but most people aren't going to say, new func or anything. They're just going to tab autocomplete a delegate or lambda or whatever.
I mean, the nice thing with a delegate is that you can name the concept, right? You can say this is X, right? But I think in this case, the property name does the same thing, right? So it's not like it's more, I think, if you pass things as parameter, then when it gets really annoying. But Yeah, I think it's
think
just
if it's unobvious, like if there are a lot of bools, I would argue for delegate, right? But
yeah. If the types are
sorry.
disjoint, then for sure, right? If you have like in comma bool, right, then it becomes insane. Same with bools in general. Like most of the time, a bool by itself doesn't tell you anything unless it's like it's a predicate and it happens to be of type func of bool, in which case it's obvious what the bool means. But yeah. So, do we believe that func is better? Do we think the delegate was better?
I like the func. I don't think the delegate adds a whole lot here.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
And the guidelines are basically use func or action unless there's a really good reason you can't, such as the language won't allow it, or you have 3 ints that need to explain what they are.
Right. All right.
Naming with the callback without async in the name is fine.
I believe so, because this is just holding the callback, or there's nothing asynchronous about that property.
Yeah, we don't like connect callback in HTTP client doesn't connect callback async.
Yeah. I mean, it gets weird if somebody invokes the property, but I don't think anybody does that, so I don't think that's a problem. All right, so then I just click comment here. If I can figure out what the button is. Here we go.
This was the hardest part of the whole API, right, Manya?
No, this was the easiest. But we got through some like patterns with the options, so which we can just like follow in the next class.
Okay, so with quick connection, we automatically know we want to pull over the as supported. And again, I'll have the same, instead of create connection async, it should probably just be connect async, because that is the verb saying what is actually happening.
Do we want to take a look at it and start talking about it, or are we just start?
We got 10 minutes.
Yeah, good 10 minutes.
Yeah.
Or we can do the exception if we choose to. That might be easier.
That's too easy. Let's do the hard thing.
Well, then open the stream.
Yeah, I don't think we should jump to the stream until we have the connection. So, and the connection is more similar to the listener, right? So, connection is what the listener hands out. So, I think
it's used on both server and client, right? There was I think there was a question I had about the connect call and where the connect goes, because the connection is returned from the call to connect, right? And last I saw, there was a connect async API on the server side connection as well. Is that get moved?
After we get your feedback, we basically merged it and removed the connect async.
Awesome.
We already worked that in. Yeah.
Nice. Okay.
So are we approved? Can we go to connection?
Yeah, let's go to the connection.
I mean, it's approved, but vacuously so, because it involved a type that hasn't itself been improved. So
yeah, it's a bit complicated. So
okay. Quick connection. Well, voila. So we have a bunch of properties here: remote endpoint, local endpoint. Know that those are the endpoints once the connection is already connected, so they can be IP endpoint. For the opening new connection, we have only endpoint, which can take DNS endpoint as well, and that's part of the quick connection options. We have remote certificate, negotiated application protocol, and I also got a feedback for TLS version from James Newton King with basically saying we might consider bagging them into a class or struct, like having one TLS settings or security related property back on QUIC connection.
This currently mimics SSL stream.
Yeah.
No beer.
Then also another feedback I got was why the X509 certificate is not X509 certificate 2. I think we can do it. As far as I remember, Thomas said that we have it actually, so we can expose it as X509 certificate 2. I'm not security person, I don't care.
Yeah, nothing in the framework should ever allocate the instance of the base class. And SSL stream has API that returns the base class, but because it predated the X509 certificate 2, which is just a stupid political boundary of red bits versus green bits. Yay.
Wow.
So anyway, so we prepared the new one, so that's fine. We were not sure about sort of consistency, but so let's change it to the second version. That's fine.
Then we have two interesting functions, OpenStream async and AcceptStream async. The first one is opening outgoing stream. The second one is accepting incoming stream. And the OpenStream async takes argument QUIC stream type, which basically says whether the stream should be unidirectional or bidirectional. I got the feedback on the naming that we should be more explicit, that the OpenStream async is creating outgoing stream. So we might consider different naming here. AcceptStream async is following the same pattern as accept connection async, so I don't think there's anything controversial.
Yeah, because looking at just open and accept stream, I would see open as return me an unallocated thing that I should be messing with state and then calling accept on. And if it's the other direction, then I would, yeah, open outbound and then accept, or accept inbound. I think accept is obvious. It's you're letting one happen, but just open versus accept feels like a connected or pre-connected to me.
So what is the suggestion then? Keep the naming or change the naming?
Yeah.
So to open, I would add from the comment, it says create an outbound. So I would say open outbound stream. And then for the accept, I have no preference between accept and accept inbound.
I have a question. Like, is open nomenclature, is create weird? Is it creating or is it opening a stream, like the open?
What's the difference?
I mean, there's no difference. I'm mostly asking about semantics. If it were called create stream async, would that be weird? Or is in QUIC nomenclature, is it opening a stream?
Well, the spec doesn't explicitly say that the operation is called open, but they are using the verb open for describing this operation. Yeah.
I see. So the server opens the stream.
Well, as well. Client.
If the client goes
as
in stream
well.
too, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I was looking at the APIs on the JavaScript client for web transport, and I think it's create stream. Web transport, for those who don't know, is a browser API to expose QUIC to people in browsers. You can actually like use QUIC in. It's really using QUIC streams in the browser directly over HTTP3.
It's WebSockets replacement over H3.
Right, and it gives you basically the raw QUIC APIs sort of in the browser, and in there, the APIs are. Is it create? Hold on, let me find it.
So basically, when the task
create stream, yeah.
So when the task is finished, then basically the stream is in usable form, right, Manyo?
Yeah. When you get the stream from OpenStream async or accept stream async, you can read, you can write, you can dispose and whatnot.
It'll be basically in connected sort of usable state. So
yeah,
not only you allocate, but it's also does whatever magic needs to happen on the protocol to make it usable.
What OpenStream async does is it basically, if you hit the stream limit on the peer, it basically waits for available stream limit to like.
It's backpressure. So in web transport, there's create, send, stream on the client side. So you get the connection, then you call create, stream, and then you get the reader, and you can read and write to it. That's the equivalent here, I think, where you like you're on the client, you connect async, you get a connection back, and then you call OpenStream, and then you start doing stuff, right? Yeah. I don't hit create. I think either is fine. Create is an interesting verb too, because create does sound like it's not connected in a way. So yeah, just other feedback, I guess.
I mean, the other option we have is we can use create for both, and then we just have create inbound and create outbound, right? Which wouldn't be terrible.
Accept is much nicer for like pulling things from like somewhere else. It's used for, on other listen APIs. Open feels more ambiguous to me. I can't tell what that's doing.
So maybe the spec actually says that the stream is created once you actually start sending the data on it. So the peer can't accept it before you actually send anything on the stream. So maybe this distinction can help you decide.
So on the server, you create a listener, you call, accept, you get the connection on the server side. And then the client connects, gets the connection back. It calls open on the client side, and the server calls accept on the server side to get a stream, right?
You don't get it.
And then they connect.
Yes, but the accept will complete only after the client actually starts sending the data, because
the
information about the stream being opened is not sent on the wire before that.
Got it.
So the
client, you call create on the client.
Or the initiator calls open, calls write, calls flush, and at that point, accept will happen on the other side.
Yes.
Yeah.
Assuming we have buffered writing.
I like create. I don't know. I kind of prefer create to open.
There's another thing to consider. We can change the behavior, and we can basically force MS-QUIC to send basically empty packet to the peer. So you would get
I don't think we want to.
No, we don't want to, but that's one option. MS-QUIC can do it. And there are other options like basically returning if there's no stream limit, so we don't have any open stream pending. And so we could also add some argument here specifying which version of stream open we can do. So the verb should be fairly generic to encompass these other options. Like we might take advantage of it in the future for doing multiple connections and whatnot.
I mean, if there's a new option, or instead of adding an option in the future, you can just add a new verb that is describing the different behavior. It doesn't have to be an overload of the same thing if it doesn't make semantic sense to be so.
Does anyone have any feelings on open versus create?
I still feel like to somebody, I mean, we know that this is already a power thing, but I feel like adding the word outbound in it somewhere just makes it more clear that you're expecting that this is the one that you call when you're about to send data instead of that you're expecting to be reading data. And maybe you're going to bidirectional and you're going to send and receive, but it's I understand accept as somebody else did something and I'm reacting to it. But create doesn't feel like it's necessarily saying that it has an opinion. So I think outbound gives it that opinion.
Would allocate be same sort of feeling as a create, saying, hey, allocate a stream?
Because allocate stream feels like then maybe you could pass it to accept of like, I've tuned some parameters I want on the stream, and now I want you to do something with it. Whereas what you're saying with this thing is we're guaranteed can write is true. Can read you get to control by a parameter now, but you don't get to tweak it after the fact. Like, so this is building the object and it is having behaviors built in, but if we just call it create, then that doesn't sound like that to me. It's sort of the like, let's get started. Yeah, so open outbound, the chat suggested open client. That may not be the best word since both sides are allowed to open it, and client implies the one that was not initially in the accept state. But yeah, I think adding the word outbound, to me at least, significantly increases the clarity of what the method is doing.
If we were to include the outbound in the naming, I would also prefer to do accept inbound because I'm kind of symmetric obsessed, so.
Yeah, that's why I suggested create for both sides and just inbound and outbound as a suffix, but it doesn't seem people like that.
Yeah, I do feel that with networking, react to somebody else doing something, the verb there is accept, and anything other than accept just feels wrong.
Unacceptable.
Wow,
nice
that was actually pretty good.
Presumably we also have the static is supported and the static create, right? Based on what we said earlier, right?
Connect.
Connect async,
We renamed it.
Yeah, public bool, public static bool is supported.
Maybe we should park it here. We're already over time.
Yeah, I think that's probably wise.
Is there any part, Manya, you want people to look at, or might be controversial just to mention it so people can have chance to think about it? Or is it the rest pretty simple?
Of the connection or the stream itself?
Connection.
Well, I check the options because we're gonna hit the same, like, should this have a default value or should this be required and initialized to 0 and whatnot.
Yeah, I feel like we could probably argue for about 30 minutes on close async taking a long.
Oh, it has to be long.
It maybe has to be a long, but maybe there are default reasons from the protocol and we want an enum as either the only thing or an overload or...
No, like this is, the spec says this is application level namespace, so it does not define any error codes. It's like HTTP 3 specs has the definition of error codes.
And they say like the underlying value that you send is a long.
Yes. Yeah, just 62 bits basically.
Is it a long or you long?
It does not matter, so we put sign.
I thought you said 62 bits, so what happens if the other 2 bits are set? And which 2 bits are they?
I let Radek answer it.
Okay, so QUIC uses variable length encoding, so it can accept values from 0 to 2 to the power of 62 minus 1 or something like that. And the topmost 2 bits are used internally to encode the length of the value. So our API will just throw argument out of range if you give it something bigger than it. We can't actually get something bigger than we can send over the wire.
Okay, so whether or not we call it signed or unsigned, the highest bit is reserved, as is the bit just beneath that.
Yes.
So being assigned type is probably nicer then. Or at least more standard. And I was wrong, you compressed that into 2 minutes.
Right, so then I'll just mark it as needs work because that's the only way I have here. And then I will set it back to API ready for review so we can take another look. So presumably we want to do this soon, right? We don't want to wait another 4 weeks.
Can we do next Tuesday?
Yeah, we can do next Tuesday. That would work.
Maybe. Like the JS interrupt thing is presumably first.
So that's the thing that we need to like figure out scheduling wise. The other option is I just can the system command line one on Thursday and move the JavaScript interrupt instead that, and then move the command line to Thursday. So then that's one option. Other option is we do tackle this on Thursday and then have next Tuesday
out.
for... You're out this Thursday? Okay, then this one is
Yeah.
next Tuesday. That makes it easy.
Okay.
Everybody cool with that? I don't hear any dissenting voices that...
Yeah, I mean, really, it's... I'll leave it up to you since the Caribbean is currently calling me. Leave it up to you to sit with Pavel on when he can talk.
If we have several weeks then of these big reviews, are we building up a backlog of lots of onesie twosie APIs?
The backlog being unrelated things, or the backlog being the unfinished stuff and the things we don't tackle in these big reviews?
The one API here and one API there in our list of API ready for review issues, rather than these monstrous 3-session, 6-hour reviews of a whole API set.
Yeah, kind of. I think that's why I normally prefer the model where we have the big reviews on Tuesdays and then we use the Thursday to burn the backlog. But the problem is right now we have like these, at least 2 big items that we want very timely. And command line we waited already like several weeks on, so I think this one is due, but I could push that out probably another 2 weeks if you really want to do.
Would it help for these big ones if we had someone from API review or a couple people from API review sit down with the people proposing the big APIs and trying to work through some of the biggest issues? That way it takes less time when it gets to the formal review. Like if I had and could spend 2 hours with, like, let's say system command line, and we could change it from 3 2-hour sessions in the official review slot time to 1 2-hour review instead, that seems like a better use of everyone's time.
I mean, that's assuming that a one-off person doing the meeting leads to conformity instead of just creates the next round of what we spend 2 hours arguing about.
Right.
But
I was just giving an example there, but like, yeah. If we're currently, we've had a few of these cases where we've had to do multiple back-to-back sessions for the big ones, and if we could somehow mitigate and reduce that to some focus time plus less time in actual review, then that might be helpful overall. We just have to figure out what people's schedules could do to accommodate that and who would be the right people to do that on.
I mean, I think anybody's always welcome to reach out to any of us to try and book some time. Like Carlos got the tar stuff through in like 4 hours, and I think I gave him like 14 hours of my time beforehand. So
yeah, that's kind of my concern is, like, I don't mind if we do things offline, but usually what ends up happening is we spend time offline and then we still meet anyways. So like if the offline time helps us to make the on time like more efficient, I think that's fine. But I don't think we should kid ourselves that we can actually approve things in a disjointed fashion, because we have never succeeded doing that. We can barely do email approvals, right? So I don't think
We should
that-
hide it from David.
Yeah, I think the
If fewer people involved, the smoother something goes. Yes.
yeah, unless it doesn't, right? So like that's the problem, right? So like if then one of us like sees this thing later and says like I disagree, and then we have to circle back, like then we just wasted a ton of time, right? So that's this has happened, right?
If you did an individual approval and approved couldn't be revoked, then but yeah, no, that's not what we do. So
yeah, at that point we might just bulk approve what we have, right? Like that has about the same
Indeed.
same level of agreement then. So yeah, so basically what I'm hearing is I should probably push out the system command line stuff just so that we can get over the backlog a little bit. I think it's not, I guess I just closed the tab. I think it wasn't that bad if we just remove the milestones here. I think it's, if we just look at 7 stuff, okay, it's pretty bad. Never mind. At some point we were down to 10. But I guess people filed more shit. This is what happened. All right, so I'll do that. I don't think we want to meet 3 times a week because we also want to, at some point, write some stuff and implement some stuff. So I think 2 is probably the maximum we can handle. All right. Alrighty then.
One suggestion about the API review. Potentially, if we are done really fast with the rest of the connection next time, we could potentially go overtime to finish the stream. So we'll be like finished with the QUIC APIs in the worst case. So like plan for overtime.
Yeah, don't jinx
next
it.
Week.
Don't make promises you can't keep. We have made that mistake a few times. But it seems like, yeah, Tuesday we should hopefully get over that. At least a good chunk of it. Alrighty, then I see you next Tuesday. Bye-bye.
That sounds good. Bye, everybody.
Oh, them.